Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm David Weston, sitting in for the moment, only for the moment, for Emily Chang here. A lot of stories going on around the world right now. And first, we want to take a look at the markets. U.S. stocks rose for a second straight day on optimism the economy will benefit from government support after hours. It was all about the impeachment. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow has more.
That's right, David. After hours, the news being that the House has the votes to impeach President Trump for a second time. The vote count, 232 in favor, 197 against, 10 Republicans voting in favor of impeaching Donald Trump. In terms of financial markets, not a lot of action out there. We're waiting on futures, of course, but currency markets pretty sanguine. Very little change in dollar yen. Yen, of course, a haven asset. Euro dollar also pretty static. In terms of what the story of the day was, this was really about outperformance of technology stocks. Technology stocks leading the games. The narrative around a recovery in the U.S. economy boosted by stimulus from a Biden presidency. You can see there the NASDAQ 100 up 0.6%. The New York FANG index up 1%. Outperforming the S&P 500 up by 0.2%. I want to focus in on the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index as well. More modest gains, up just 0.1%. But really the story here, Intel up 6% on the day on news that CEO Bob Swan will be replaced by VMware CEO Pat Gelsinger. Gelsinger was a long-time employee of Intel prior to joining VMware, so a bit of a homecoming. But the narrative from Wall Street here is around technology over finance. Gelsinger, a real tech guy, and Intel has fallen behind in key product areas over the last 12 months. That's perhaps why you see AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, down. Other names on the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index also down. Affirm, the online lender, ending its first day of trading at $97.24, almost a 100% gain above the $49 where the company priced their IPO at. And lastly, David, Airbnb up 5.7%, all-time high for that company, bringing its market cap above $100 billion, really benefiting from the rally that we've seen in travel stocks recently, but also, of course, news out of DC today from Airbnb that they will pause any bookings for DC locations throughout Inauguration Week. David.
Yeah, not happy news given what's going on in Washington. There's so much concern about security there. Thank you so much to Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow. We're going to hear much more on Affirm's first day of trading as well as Airbnb's new policy this hour. Right now, though, we want to turn to Emily Wilkins in Washington because we do have the big news of the official voting on the one article of impeachment now against President Trump. Emily, it's 232 to 197, I believe, is the vote. Any surprises in there?
There were a couple surprises. Just number one, I mean, remember the last time that we had impeachment, we were in the position where there were no Republicans who voted to impeach President Trump. And so now this time that three of them have, in particular, Conference Chair Liz Cheney, I think, says a lot. There were some names that we expected, other names that were a little bit surprising. People who are coming from really strong Trump districts, who are, tried and true conservatives, who came out in this particular incident to say that they thought the president deserved to be impeached for what happened.
Yeah, and now we are expecting to hear, as I understand, from President Trump shortly. I guess there's going to be a video address. That's what he's done since last Wednesday. We've seen videos that have been presented. They were on Twitter, not going to be on Twitter this time, I assume. So what do we expect from the president? Earlier today, he almost tried to plead for mercy, didn't he? Saying, look, I don't want any violence, don't have any violence. I really am not a violent person.
So a couple of things here. I mean, number one, yes, we have seen the president do more of these video addresses instead of live, in-person ones where he can take questions from the press. Another thing to note here is that a number of lawmakers, a bipartisan group, were getting ready to ask Trump to give the statement that he gave today. They were asking Trump prematurely to tell people, stay home. We don't want violence. We don't want what we saw last Wednesday during the Electoral College. And so lawmakers were prepared to ask Trump for that. He kind of beat them a bit to the punch by giving that message out. I mean, Trump's also been adamant. He's been defending himself against impeachment. He said that his speech to the crowds before the mob took over the Capitol, that it was totally appropriate, that nothing wrong happened there. So there's a chance that he might go and try and defend himself further this afternoon.
So in the meantime, what happens next? The one article, I should say, goes over to the Senate. Do we have any sense of when there might be a trial?
So the Senate doesn't come back until January 19th. That's one day before the Biden administration is set to begin. And there is a lot of discussion right now about what that trial is going to look like. Obviously, the Senate has a lot of things to do. They need to approve Biden's cabinet. Biden wants to pass more stimulus as well. And so there's a potential we could see something where the Senate might work in the morning and do a trial later in the afternoon. This trial also might not take an incredibly long time. As one of the House members who will be arguing the impeachment pointed out, everyone was there in the Capitol that day. Everyone knows what happened.
Fascinating. Tell me about the Capitol right now, the security, extraordinary security measures being taken. I must say, I interviewed earlier today a freshman congresswoman. Her name is Nancy Mace from South Carolina, who said that she had originally planned to go to the inauguration and now had changed her plans because she fears for her own personal safety.
The Capitol today kind of looks like a military barrack. I mean, number one, you have very tall fencing outside the Capitol that we've heard police call non-scalable. Inside, we are seeing dozens, if not hundreds, of soldiers, members of the National Guard who are just posted there. I mean, they're just lying on the floor, sitting against the hallways, just waiting to make sure that they are there for the inauguration. We are hearing total 20,000 National Guard troops will be activated. This is more than we've seen for other inaugurals and really speaks to the fact that after what happened last week, a number of top officials are really concerned about what the security is going to be next week.
Okay, thank you so much, Emily, for all your continued great reporting from Washington. That's Emily Wilkins, our colleague in Washington. Coming up next on Bloomberg Technology, we're going to talk with the head of Cisco. He's, of course, Chuck Robbins. That's coming up next, and this is Bloomberg.
President Trump has been impeached for the second time, marking the first time a U.S. president has been impeached twice. This after those violent riots at the Capitol left 5 people dead, 5 people all at the Capitol. I want to bring in Chuck Robbins, the CEO of Cisco now. And Chuck, obviously, you have been watching this as an American citizen and as a leader in U.S. business. How are you digesting this?
Well, Emily, first of all, thanks for having me. And it's certainly not been the beginning to 2021 that we had all hoped for. And candidly, it's just sad. And everything that's occurred is sad. We're at a time where, our nation has so many crises going on. We need to come together. We need to work together. We need to be solving problems for the citizens of the country. And instead, we're dealing with the things we're dealing with. So it's a sad day.
So what is your reaction to the president's impeachment? I mean, obviously, you're a business leader. We're facing an uncertain few days ahead and possibly a not peaceful transition of power.
Well, I think, as I said, it's just part of a sad narrative that's going on in the country right now. Clearly, what occurred last week was a travesty. It shouldn't have happened, and those who are responsible need to be held accountable. I'm looking forward to next week. I'm looking forward to moving forward. I think there's so much that we need to get done and we can get done. And I never dreamed, honestly, that the United States of America, at a time where we had so many challenges, that we couldn't put down our partisan beliefs and actually come together as a leadership team in Washington and actually try to solve some of these problems. But clearly, that's what we've witnessed.
So, look, what is your outlook under a new administration for the things that are some of Cisco's priority, whether it is cybersecurity or infrastructure or our global competitiveness with countries like China?
Yeah, Emily, I actually think that technology has a lot to offer in what's going on in the world right now, what's going on in the United States. I think when you look at the incoming administration, clearly there's a lot of focus around infrastructure, and I think that will create jobs, and it'll also modernize a lot of the capabilities in this country, which we need to do. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, obviously, around cybersecurity. We need to deal with data privacy issues. I think the impending rollouts of 5G that are going on in the United States and around the world are certainly important to our future as well. And I think that technology can also play a big role in the the inequality issues that we face in our country. We've proven through this pandemic that people can work anywhere. And I think that gives us the opportunity to create jobs in places where we might not have thought that was possible in the past. So I think that, there's a lot to be done. There's a lot that we can do. And we're optimistic that, we can come together as a nation and actually begin to solve some of these problems.
Meantime, the pandemic is still raging. You and I are both in California, where we're hitting new peaks in cases and hospitalizations. You've been thinking about how Cisco and technology can help with the vaccine rollout, which, to be fair, has been slow. How do you imagine Cisco and technology in general helping to improve that process?
Well, we've been involved in lots of activity relative to the pandemic, and we are obviously experiencing the peak right now. I think early days, you looking at some of the technology we were bringing in for pop-up clinics. Now we're supporting with wireless and cameras and different technology, the pop-up vaccination centers that are beginning to show up. We have IoT sensors that are ensuring that these vaccines are transported effectively in many cases. We have security cameras that are monitoring them, and obviously we're providing all the connectivity for the locations where they need to be administered. And hopefully we'll begin to see much more progress on this as I know everyone has been so looking forward to the vaccines. I sure hope we can do a better job over the next month.
Now, let's talk about how the productivity world, how we work, evolves as we move into a new normal. What's your sense of when the business environment in general will return to normal?
Well, you know what? One thing that we've seen is that our customers moved from, the rapid response that they had to deal with last year, getting their employees working from home securely with the collaboration tools they needed. And then they took a bit of a pause, and then we've seen customers now, I think, believe they have to move. And so we see customers investing. Obviously, technology was a key priority before the pandemic, and I think now every customer realizes how critically important it is. And one of the aspects of that is, what does the future of work look like? And I think we all believe now that it will be a hybrid model. We think employees, as most people think, that they'll work some days from home, some days from the office. We need to work really hard to make sure that the technology experience for those individuals who are remote and those who are sitting in a room in the meeting are quite similar, so that they experience the same productivity. But I think it will change going forward. And again, it changes how we think about where we live. It changes how we think about where we can hire, where we can invest in resources. And I think it is going to be a different world as we come through this.
Now, in other news, Cisco is continuing to do deals and try to do deals. You recently won a temporary court order to block Acacia from abandoning a planned merger. Can you give us an update on that? If necessary, could you raise or would you raise your offer?
Well, Emily, as you know, it's currently a legal issue, so I'm not going to be able to comment much. But I will say that, we were fairly confident that we had the appropriate Chinese approvals, and we thank the Chinese for working with us to finally get to that point. We've been there a long time, and we really appreciate, the opportunity. At the same time, they didn't believe we had it, so we're having those discussions obviously right now, and I'm hopeful that we'll come to some sort of rationalization over the next few weeks.
And as with Cisco's business, obviously WebEx has been a standout success in the midst of the pandemic. Hardware sales have more suffered. And I'm curious, do you expect more of the same this year, or as trends evolve and as the macro environment changes, do you see a change in some of your own business trends as well?
Yeah, Emily, I think that WebEx is up to have 600 million meeting attendees per month. It's really held up well. The teams have done an incredible job. The feature velocity is faster than it ever has been. And I think that when you look at other aspects of our business, one of the things we saw is that those customers who had begun to modernize their infrastructure, even sort of their underlying infrastructure in their campuses, we saw that continue. And it was really those customers who were still buying the legacy technology, the older technology, that's what we saw slow down. So those customers who were committed to it kept moving. And I think the rest of the customers realize now between the cybersecurity events, the pandemic, the other crises, that they have to have a robust, modern technology infrastructure. And so I think we will see customers begin to invest, and I think that they will be looking to prepare their organizations and the foundation of their organizations for whatever they may face in the future.
All right, Cisco CEO Chuck Robbins. Chuck, thank you so much for joining us on a certainly momentous day in American history. Really appreciate you sharing your perspective today with us. All right, coming up, Airbnb takes an aggressive step to defend the U.S. Capitol as the FBI warns about so-called armed militia groups planning more protests across the country around inauguration. Airbnb's global policy head, Chris Lahane, joins us next. This is Bloomberg. Airbnb says it will cancel all reservations in the Washington, D.C. area during the week of President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration and reimburse hosts what they would have made at Airbnb's expense. This is an attempt to prevent further attacks at the Capitol 1 week after pro-Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building, which resulted in 5 deaths. Joining us now, Chris Lahane, Senior Vice President for Global Policy and Communications at Airbnb. So, Chris, not only are you canceling reservations, you're doing it at Airbnb's expense and reimbursing them what they would have made if these stays had happened. So this is a pretty dramatic move on your part. Who did you consult about this, and how did you come to this decision?
Yeah, Emily, thanks for having us. And, a million years, I didn't think we'd be having this type of a conversation. Really, we've been consulting with local officials, mayor's office, federal officials, members of Congress. Obviously, yesterday you had the 2 governors, the governor of Maryland, governor of Virginia, and also the mayor of Washington, D.C., all make really clear that they just did not want people traveling to Washington, D.C. And, we have a decision-making framework that we call our stakeholder framework, where we just really consider all the issues impacting our stakeholders. And one of those stakeholders are the communities that we're in. And it just became really clear to us that the right thing to do here was to block people traveling to Washington, given all the guidance, given everything that's going on, given, frankly, the interest of our republic. We certainly did want to make sure that our hosts, who are going to be economically impacted, are made whole, and that is part of our stakeholder framework. But ultimately, this was, a pretty simple decision to prioritize the public health and safety, and particularly given the guidance that we were being given yesterday from those various leaders.
Since then, the president has been impeached for the second time, the first president ever to be impeached twice. You are also canceling reservations on Hotel Tonight. I haven't heard other hotels saying that they're going to be canceling reservations. Do you think that they should be doing that?
It's a great question. I'm pretty comfortable speaking about our decision making. Obviously, we'll let others make their decisions. Do believe that all of us, sort of thinking of Thomas Jefferson's first inaugural, where, to paraphrase, he talked about the fact that we're all Democrats, we're all Republicans, meaning that we're all Americans. And I do think we're all in a moment right now where that really should be our North Star and guiding star, and in that context, really prioritizing trust and safety. I do think, Emily, something that you and I have talked about historically, this concept of stakeholder capitalism and making decisions that consider all those stakeholders. And I do think maybe after some time passes, people will look back on this moment, and I'm not sure anything good has really come of it, but it's been interesting to see a number of other businesses and business leaders really standing up and making decisions that are prioritizing the interests of the country. And I do wonder if this will be one of those moments where people actually saw stakeholder capitalism in action and people actually putting action to words. We made the decision based on our application of that stakeholder framework and what we thought was in the best interest of the community.
Now, how much of the Virginia and Maryland suburbs do your cancellations include? And can you give us any idea how much this will cost Airbnb, and whether you're potentially going to make some similar decisions in other state capitals across the country, given the warnings from the FBI?
Yeah, great questions. Let me try to take them individually. In terms of the geographic parameters or scope, I'm sure you'll appreciate this. We are not looking to be able to give the specifics. So anyone out there who is looking to try to evade the systems that we have in place to block calendars and block travel can take advantage of that. We're certainly applying this approach to the greater DC area, the metro area, but have been pretty careful about not giving the detailed specifics, really in an effort to make sure that people can't evade the systems that we have in place. It's going to impact roughly approximately 5,500 reservations in that area. But we also have signals that allow us to be able to change those parameters pretty quickly if we feel like we need to expand. From a financial perspective, really that never even came into the conversation. We've been removing violent extremists, neo-Nazis, really dating back to before Charlottesville in 2017. It's something that we've been doing on an ongoing basis, and those conversations just never involve how much is this going to cost or what the financial impact is going to be. Even in a case like that, really was what's the right thing to do. And I know that may sound trite, but it really was. I remember having a conversation with Brian Chesky, our CEO, and it was, he had asked, let's make sure we're doing everything possible, and never raised at all, let's look at the financial impact. It was just do the right thing. And then as it regards other capitals, you're 100% right. Obviously, governments have issued warnings, and the other day we announced a 7-point plan to sort of help address how we keep these specific types of folks off the platform. We have flexibility and adaptability to move that around. We're certainly in contact with the different states and the different governments. And we've been doing this all along, and we'll continue to do it. And obviously take the learnings and apply them as we go forward, and work with all these governments to try to do everything that we can to help keep people safe in this moment.
Okay. And Chris, we've got about 30 seconds left, but you did say that you've identified numerous individuals who have been associated with hate groups or involved in criminal activity tied to the Capitol riots. Can you give us a sense of how many or where that stands?
Yeah, we've been doing that really since, and some of the history. In 2016, we introduced something called We Accept, which is a set of commitments to be on the Airbnb platform. And coming out of that, built a whole bunch of systems to be able to identify folks who are associated with violent extremist organizations, neo-Nazi organizations, and on a regular basis, really going back 4 or 5 years now, we just take people off on a regular basis when we encounter them and discover them.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing the dramatic steps that you're taking. Appreciate you taking the time to join us. And, obviously you're an experienced Washington insider. Chris Lehane, Airbnb head of global policy. Thank you. Coming up, Twitter, Facebook, and other networks facing backlash from world leaders for banning President Trump. We're going to talk to the former CEO of Twitter and O1 Advisors co-founder Dick Costolo. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. The U.S. House has voted to impeach President Trump for the second time on a single charge of incitement of insurrection. Our Josh Wingrove joins us now from the White House with the latest. Josh, she is now the first president in history to be impeached twice. What happens now?
Well, it's going to go to the Senate. We have Chuck Schumer, who, of course, will become the majority leader after inauguration, pledging that there will be a trial. Democrats are urging things to move as quickly as possible, but Mitch McConnell has sort of ruled that out. It doesn't look right now like there's enough votes for a conviction, but, would be for a trial. As for Trump himself, we know virtually nothing about how he'll respond. He's said to be preparing a video address as we speak. I'm speaking to you from the White House. He has not spoken to the press here today. He said no public events on his schedule today. So it sounds like they're going to record a video, essentially dump it out, and that'll be his response. As for the trial, we have no clue what will be his approach, who his lawyers will be, who his team more broadly will be, which is simply up in the air. So the president right now, given that he's been frozen out of his social media feeds, we're uncharacteristically blind into his state of mind as today's events unfold.
Now, you have told us over the last several days that it is unlikely that he will be actually removed from office or that he will resign between now and January 20th. Does this change that?
I don't think so. I mean, he wants to be defiant. He habitually is someone to be, he doubles down on everything. So he came out yesterday and said that the 25th isn't a threat. Mike Pence released a letter to the same effect. So he's not going to be pushed. And Donald Trump really, he's indicated he didn't think he did anything wrong. So it would be remarkable for him to turn around and jump. So it looks like he will be president until the 20th. Whether he'll be president in Washington, we don't know. He might. It's unclear when he'll leave. We expect him to go to Mar-a-Lago, which is at least nominally going to be his residence in his post-presidency in Florida. We don't know when that would be. We don't know if he'll hold any events before then. But by the day, it seems he's losing staff and aides who are departing the White House either as scheduled or in response to the events of last week. So the White House is sort of, winding down as Donald Trump deals with this sort of new crisis, one of his own making, in response to the events of Wednesday.
So regardless of whether or not he's actually still in office on Inauguration Day, certainly this is a stain on the president forever. How will this change his post-presidency life? I
think it probably lowers the odds of whether he would run again, but it's a little bit of a guessing game. He simply has not wanted to commit to 2024. It really leaves the Republicans at more of a crossroads. Before this, there would have been an overwhelming gravitational pull towards Trump. He would have a lot of allies in the House in particular. People running in nomination races as Republicans would want to look as close to Trump as possible in a lot of districts. Now it's a little more murky, and so what's also murky is the money question. You've seen blowback from donors to the events, the mob storming the Capitol, which of course has left at least 5 dead. We don't really know the health and fatality toll of that event fully yet. So I think Donald Trump is going to hang around one way or another. The mob and all the fallout since then undoubtedly undercuts that, but we'll have a fairly early test of how strong his grip is still, because there's a push in the House to remove Liz Cheney as House Conference Chair. She's the third-ranking Republican in the House. She, of course, was the highest-profile person to vote today to impeach President Trump. She was one of 10 Republicans to do so. If she holds on, then that is maybe a sign that the party is ready to move on from Trump. If she gets dumped, then I think it's a sign that Trump's grip is still very strong on the Republican Party.
Right, and that number 10 Republicans may sound small, but it certainly is significant, and the future of the Republican Party very much in question, as you indicate. Our White House correspondent, Josh Wingrove. Josh, thanks so much. We'll check back in with you as things continue to develop. All right. Meantime, Facebook's banning of President Trump, alongside a similar move by Twitter, has been blasted by critics around the world, calling it censorship. For more, we're joined by a guest who applauded the decision that Twitter made, saying that it took a lot of courage, while millions of users sure to hate whatever you decide, specifically is what he said. Dick Costolo, former CEO of Twitter and co-founder and managing partner of O1 Advisors, is with us. Dick, I just got to start by getting your reaction as an American citizen, an investor. President Trump being impeached for the second time, the only president to be impeached in history twice. How are you digesting this?
Yeah, I mean, another slow news week, right? I don't know, it all comes at you so fast. I said in the tweet that you mentioned, the night of the riots, these things all change in real time so quickly. It's hard to get historical perspective on them that then seems to come a week later and then maybe change a week after that. So the short answer is I don't know. It certainly is obvious that this will go down as an important moment in history. It's hard to understand in real time how it will be viewed. The diametrically opposed perspectives on the actions that these technology companies are taking from users on the platforms is it's something to behold. You've got everybody thinking that it's an obvious decision what should be done. It's just that 45% of the people think one thing and 45% of the people think the exact opposite thing.
So on that note, Twitter has made the decision to ban the president's account permanently. His account has been deleted from Twitter. All of the tweets from the last 4 years are gone. And to be clear, Facebook has suspended him indefinitely, but not permanently. Do you think this was the right call?
Look, I'm never going to second guess the management team of the company. And I'll tell you why. I'm not just, bailing out on you. Is because you have all these people who say, this is an easy decision. It should have been done, X years ago. It's easy to say that when you don't have to face any of the consequences of what happens next. It's easy to stand there on the moral high ground when you don't have to think about any of the implications of what might happen later. There are going to undoubtedly be all sorts of regulatory pressure brought to bear on these technology platforms. I'm not just talking about Twitter now. I'm talking about Facebook and AWS removing Parler, which is going to be another sort of potentially wild precedent. I just think that the ramifications that these companies are going to face that are probably a lot bigger than we might anticipate that they are now are going to be enormous, and I know that went into the decision-making process. And again, there's all sorts of context that you have when you're making these decisions inside the company. Those things include death threats against employees, threats of physical violence against employees, and you have to balance all of these things when you're trying to make a decision in real time about what to do. So for people to sit outside and throw stones and say they did the right thing or they did the wrong thing, it just feels a lot like Monday morning quarterbacking when you know the results of what happened, and it's easy to say, hey, they shouldn't have gone for it on 4th and 2. Well, yeah, they didn't make it. We all know that now, so it's obvious in hindsight. So that's my perspective on this. I think a lot of people think it's an obvious decision one way or the other, and none of those people have the context that the management teams of these companies have.
Now, the president's aides, as we understand, have been exploring alternative options like Parler, which may never find another web hosting home, or Gab. It's also been suggested the president could start his own social network. Do you think that he could successfully do that at this point?
It's remarkably difficult to start a social network, irrespective of who you are or the resources that you have, or the people that or how well financed you are. I mean, look at Google, and how much money and time and resources and energy went into Google Plus, which is now no longer with us. So that would be really sounds like a 1 in a million. Oh, and not because of who the person is or what they think, just because of how remarkably difficult it is for these things to get any momentum.
Now, Twitter shares have suffered over the last couple of days. They recovered a bit today. There's concern that President Trump leaving the platform is really going to hurt Twitter. Are you worried about that?
I think that the notion that, engagement metrics or ad revenue, would go down as a result of the company taking some action, and that may be why they did or didn't do something, I think is, as your previous guest mentioned about Airbnb, that doesn't ever go into the decision-making equation. It just doesn't. It's easy to think that, and it's easy for people to look at this from the outside and say, well, they must be worried about engagement. That's why they, let this person stay on the platform. Or those things are not part of the equation. It's all this other stuff. It's what are the downstream regulatory restrictions going to be that are going to be brought to bear against us? What are the global political ramifications we're going to face? There are heads of state of other countries that say lots of horrible things on the platform. Or are we going to be, is our hands going to be tied there? Or are our hands going to be forced there? Those are the kinds of things that go into these decision-making processes, along with the threats of physical violence against employees. It's much less about, we're worried about engagement metrics going down. I'm sure the company has some sense of what that might look like, but I don't think it went into the decision-making process.
Now, it seems it's hard to believe it's been almost a year since the pandemic began, and you joined us early on saying that you were still a buyer in the public markets. We've seen more market turmoil over the last few days. We face some uncertainty ahead, given the administration changeover, what could or could not be a peaceful transition of power. I wonder, are you still a buyer in the public markets? And what are you doing and buying in the private markets?
I'm more of a buyer in the private markets. I think in the public markets, the risk is extraordinarily underpriced right now, almost surprisingly so. The markets seem to ignore it, which is interesting. In the private markets, however, and you've got another guest coming on, Max Levchin, I think later on, in the fintech space, I think in the private markets, fintech continues to be underappreciated. And perhaps surprisingly so, given how well it's doing in the public markets. You've got companies like Square and Adyen and others that are, as public companies, up almost 100-fold from their IPOs just a few years ago. And there are a number of companies in the private markets, like a couple of our investments, Tipalti, a global payments automation platform, and Spot On, a point of sale solution that we're super excited about and we think continue to be underappreciated in the private markets.
You mentioned Tipalti there, an alternative payments solution. In terms of, where are you placing your bets, and how do you see work and the future of work evolving, given that nobody knows what the new normal is actually going to be, how we're going to be paying for things, where we're going to be working, whether or not we're ever going to go back to the office?
Wow, that got dark there for a second. Look, I think we're going to go back to the office, but what's sort of become obvious is that collaboration tools and the ability to automate anything that was previously a manual process is going to be vital and critical, because some percentage of work will be remote going forward, whether that's a 10% or 95% remains to be seen, but it's not going to be close to 0% anymore. So collaboration software and software that automates formerly manual processes like Tipalti, which again automates global payables and payments solutions. Those are going to be invaluable, and their total addressable market is just going to continue to grow. So we love those kinds of companies. They tend to not have much churn at all. Once you migrate to them, you tend to use them for more and more things. And we've seen with Tipalti, its annual top line growth has accelerated. So we think, irrespective of what happens with the future of remote work, as it were, it's going to include more things being automated and more collaboration tools. And we're investing heavily into that space, wherever we see those things.
All right. Got it. Dick Costolo, thank you so much for joining us. Always so great to hear your perspective, and on such a very important day today. Dick Costolo, former CEO of Twitter, founder of O1 Advisors. All right, coming up, as Dick Costolo said, Affirm almost doubling its valuation on the first day of trading. I'm going to speak with the CEO, Max Levchin, next. This is Bloomberg. We've got some breaking news. Poshmark, the secondhand marketplace, has just priced its shares, said to price at $42 a piece, which is above the marketed range. Poshmark, the secondhand marketplace, we're expecting to start trading tomorrow, and we will, of course, be covering that. Meantime, Affirm hit the market today, almost doubling in its public debut. In the latest multi-billion-dollar tech company to start trading significantly higher than its initial offering price. Joining me now, Max Levchin, the CEO of Affirm. So Max, obviously this is a resounding endorsement of Affirm from investors, but you also potentially left a lot of money on the table. What is your reaction to the day's events?
We've known each other for a long time. I think you'll have to agree when I say I'd like to take the long view. I think it is really, really important to know what this is all about. We are not, this is not an exit, it's not a finish line, and we didn't, leave something. We started a new leg of our journey, and it's super exciting. And the goals were very clear. We wanted to raise at least $1 billion. We really wanted to tell our story, and we wanted to recruit lots of professional and retail investors to join what we think is almost a revolution in consumer finance. And so all of the goals were accomplished. Very happy about that. The market will do what it does. It'll price us, and I just really hope people evaluate our performance as a stock in increments of quarters and years, not in one day.
Well, and now you are a public company, and you've got to keep up the momentum. I'm sure you were somewhat prepared for this. We saw this happen with Airbnb. We saw this happen with DoorDash. But are you at all concerned this puts additional pressure on the company to live up to very high expectations?
I think we've always been very clear and relatively thoughtful, and certainly, it's in our DNA to be transparent. What we think we're going to deliver, what we think we're going to build, and our job is to tell our story clearly and forecast what we can and guide what we can do, and be held to that account. It's my first day as a publicly traded CEO. Ask me again in a few months what the pressure is like.
We most certainly will, Max. I got to ask you, we are in an incredibly volatile, unprecedented political climate. We have the president being impeached for the second time, the first president in history to be impeached twice. Certainly this impacts sentiment, and your customers are consumers who, many of them are suffering because of a pandemic. They've lost their jobs. What is your outlook on the next year, given these remarkable circumstances?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. We live in the strangest of times, certainly in my memory. I think, first of all, it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. What we witnessed in DC a few days ago is a disgrace. And as an American and a relatively late stage in life, American by choice, I take great pride in my citizenship. I believe in tenets of democracy, in rule of law, and all the building blocks of this country are really important to me. And both as a private individual and an executive and a founder. So what we saw, I think, was frankly just egg on our face, for lack of a better term. And I hope to never witness that again. And I hope we do better as a society. That said, I think that the dream I believed in is this idea when my family came to America is that you can be anything and you can recover from any footfall. And I believe that our economy will recover, and Affirm certainly has a major part to play there. We're excited to help in the regrowth of hopefully all those lost jobs and all the businesses that can use the sales and the customers. But I'm optimistic, but I'm probably a semi-permanent optimist just by training and trade.
So what is your outlook on e-commerce in general? We've got just about 30 seconds left, given that, on the one hand, we're potentially going back to a new normal, but on the other, we're still in uncertain economic times.
I'm very convinced that the sort of non-incremental, non-linear shift from offline to online is not flipping back. I think we may go back to our offices, as Dick said, but I don't think we're going back to shopping the way we did. I think online, the giant leap that offline gave to online is here to stay. And again, Affirm is excited to be a part of it.
All right. Max Levchin, CEO of Affirm, on your first day as a public company CEO. Thank you so much, Max, for taking the time. We'll catch up with you in a couple months to see how it's going. Okay, coming up, we will recap where things stand in Washington after President Trump has been impeached for the second time. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Let's get to a few more top tech stories of today. A change at the top of Intel. CEO Bob Swan is stepping down next month. He will be replaced by the head of VMware, Pat Gelsinger. The world's best-known chip maker has been under pressure from activist investor Dan Loeb to explore strategic alternatives for the company. YouTube has removed new content from President Trump's channel, citing concerns about the ongoing potential for violence after the riot at the U.S. Capitol. The platform also blocks his account from uploading new content for at least 7 days, while comments on the channel are indefinitely disabled. Meantime, Google says it is suspending all political ads from Thursday to at least January 21st, the day after President-elect Biden's inauguration. And of course, recapping our top story, President Trump impeached again. He now faces a Senate trial after the riot at the Capitol. The U.S. House impeached him by a vote of 232 to 197 on a single charge of incitement of insurrection. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will be determining how quickly to send the impeachment article to the Senate for a trial. Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell has rejected Democratic leader Chuck Schumer's plea to agree to bring senators back for an emergency session and start the trial before January 20th, when Trump leaves office and President-elect Biden is inaugurated, which means we expect President Trump to be in office on Inauguration Day. We will have the very latest here. Do not leave Bloomberg Television. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. We've got Daybreak Asia coming up next. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.